The ice cracked beneath Ophelia Carson's boots like a gunshot, and before she could scream, the frozen river swallowed her whole into darkness so cold it burned. The morning had started with such promise. Ophelia had left her family's homestead just outside Dodge City, Kansas, before dawn on February 14th, 1878, determined to check the traps. Her father had set along the Arkansas River before the winter storm everyone predicted would arrive by nightfall. Her father had taken ill with fever 3 days prior, and her mother refused to leave his bedside. At 22 years old, Ophelia had grown accustomed to handling tasks most women left to their menfolk. The frontier demanded strength from everyone who called it home, regardless of what society back east might say about proper feminine behavior. She had been careful, testing each step across the frozen river with her walking stick. The traps were on the far bank, and the bridge lay 2 miles upstream. Crossing the ice saved time, and time mattered when storm clouds gathered on the horizon like bruises across pale skin. But winter in Kansas proved treacherous and unpredictable. What appeared solid could hide weaknesses beneath, and Ophelia learned this lesson too late. The current seized her immediately, dragging her downstream beneath the ice ceiling. The world became a nightmare of rushing water and impenetrable white above her head. She clawed at the ice, but her heavy winter coat dragged her down, waterlogged and impossibly heavy. Her lungs screamed for air. Panic flooded her mind as thoroughly as the water flooded her clothes. She could see light filtering through the ice, distorted and unreachable, mocking her desperate attempts to find the hole through which she had fallen. Her fingers scraped uselessly against the smooth underside of the ice as the current tumbled her forward. She tried to swim to fight, but the cold sapped her strength with terrifying speed. Her thoughts fragmented. She saw her mother's face, her father's gentle smile, the kitchen of their home where she had baked bread just yesterday. The memories flickered like candle flames in wind, threatening to extinguish entirely. Then something changed. The ice above her exploded inward, and a hand plunged into the water, fingers spread wide and searching. Through her dimming vision, Ophelia saw the hand, saw the arm attached to it, saw salvation offered in the midst of certain death. She reached up with the last of her strength, and iron fingers closed around her wrist. The man hauled her upward with such force that they both tumbled backward onto the ice when she broke the surface. Ophelia gasped and choked, river water burning her throat as she coughed it up. Her rescuer pulled her away from the jagged hole, dragging her across the ice toward the bank. She could not help him. Her limbs refused to obey. The cold had invaded so deep into her body that shivering seemed beyond her capability. "Stay with me," a voice commanded, rough and urgent. "Do not close your eyes. Look at me." She tried to focus on his face, but her vision swam. She registered dark hair, a strong jaw, eyes the color of storm clouds. Then they reached the riverbank, and he lifted her as though she weighed nothing, carrying her up the slope toward a stand of cottonwoods where a large bay horse stood ground-tied, its breath steaming in the frigid air. "I need to get you warm," he said, setting her down against a tree trunk. His hands moved quickly, efficiently, stripping away her soaked coat. "These wet clothes will kill you faster than the drowning would have." Through chattering teeth, Ophelia tried to protest, but he was already wrapping her in a thick wool blanket he pulled from his saddlebags. Then another blanket. His own coat came off next, and he wrapped that around her as well. "My name is Vincent Walker," he said, crouching before her and rubbing her arms vigorously through the layers of fabric. "I am a ranch hand at the Triple Creek spread, about 5 miles west of here. I was checking fence lines when I saw you fall through. Can you tell me your name?" "Oh, Ophelia," she managed. "Ophelia Carson. Miss Carson, I need to get you somewhere warm immediately. Can you ride?" She wanted to say yes. Pride demanded she say yes, but honesty won out. "I do not think so." He nodded once decisively and began saddling his horse with practiced speed. Within moments, he lifted her onto the saddle and swung up behind her, pulling her back against his chest and wrapping his arms around her to hold the reins. "My line shack is closer than town," he said. "Hold on." The ride blurred together in Ophelia's memory afterward. She remembered the horse's warmth beneath her, the solid strength of Vincent's body behind her, the way his arms formed a cage of safety around her trembling form. She remembered trees passing, the landscape stark and beautiful in its winter severity. She remembered starting to feel warm, which some distant part of her mind recognized as dangerous, a sign that the cold had penetrated too deep. "Stay awake," Vincent kept saying, his voice close to her ear. "Talk to me, Miss Carson. Tell me about your family." "Father is sick," she mumbled. "Mother is caring for him. I was checking traps, needed to check the traps." "You are very brave," he said, "and very foolish. The ice has been unreliable all week." "Needed to help," she insisted, her tongue thick and clumsy. "Father would have gone if he could. Someone had to go." The line shack appeared ahead, a small but sturdy structure tucked into a sheltered hollow. Vincent dismounted and lifted Ophelia down, carrying her inside and kicking the door shut behind them. The interior was sparse but clean, containing a pot-bellied stove, a narrow bed, a table with 2 chairs, and shelves holding supplies. He set her on the bed and immediately set about building a fire in the stove. "I need to get you out of the rest of these wet clothes," he said, not looking at her as flames began to lick at the kindling. "I will turn my back, but you must do it now. Hypothermia will kill you if we do not get you warm." Ophelia's fingers fumbled uselessly at the buttons of her dress. They would not cooperate. She could not make them work. Frustrated tears leaked from her eyes. Vincent glanced back, saw her struggling, and approached with obvious reluctance. "I apologize," he said quietly. "I give you my word as a gentleman that I will not look at anything I should not, and I will never speak of this to anyone. But you need help." She nodded, too exhausted and cold to argue. His hands were gentle but efficient as he helped her out of the wet dress, the soaked chemise beneath it, the sodden stockings. He kept his eyes averted, his jaw tight with what she recognized as determination to remain respectful despite the impossible situation. He wrapped her in dry blankets and settled her close to the stove, then turned away to tend his horse, giving her privacy and time to compose herself. When he returned, stamping snow from his boots, the shack had begun to warm. Ophelia sat huddled in the blankets, feeling sensation return to her extremities in painful tingles. Vincent busied himself making coffee, heating water, moving around the small space with careful attention to staying on his side of the room. "How are you feeling?" he asked, pouring coffee into a tin cup. "Warmer," she said. "Thanks to you. You saved my life, Mr. Walker." "Vincent, please," he said, offering her the coffee. "And I only did what anyone would do." "Not anyone would have broken through that ice," Ophelia said, accepting the cup and wrapping her hands around its warmth. "You could have drowned too. That was incredibly dangerous." He shrugged, but a faint color rose in his cheeks. "Could not stand by and watch you die." For the first time, Ophelia truly looked at him. He was perhaps 25 or 26, tall and lean with the rangy build of a man who spent his days working hard. His dark hair curled slightly where it brushed his collar, and his gray eyes held a depth that spoke of intelligence and character. His face was handsome in a rugged way, all strong lines and weathered tan. But more than his appearance, something in his manner drew her. a quiet competence, a genuine kindness that showed in how carefully he maintained proper distance while ensuring she had everything she needed. "My parents will be worried," she said suddenly, remembering. "I need to get word to them." "The storm is moving in fast," Vincent said, glancing toward the window where wind had begun to rattle the shutters. "We will not be able to leave until it passes. But once it does, I will take you home myself and explain to your parents what happened. They will understand." Ophelia bit her lip. Being alone with a man overnight, even under these circumstances, could ruin her reputation. But Vincent was right. Through the window, she could see snow beginning to fall thick and fast. Leaving now would be suicide. "What about your work? Will you get in trouble for not returning to the ranch?" "They know I sometimes stay at the line shack during bad weather," Vincent said. "And saving your life is more important than checking fence lines. Do not worry about me." They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the storm build outside. Vincent heated some beans and salt pork, and they shared the simple meal. As the day wore on and the storm raged, they began to talk. Vincent told her about growing up in Missouri, about losing his parents to cholera when he was 18, about drifting west and finding work on various ranches before settling at the Triple Creek spread. "The owner, Mr. Harrison, is a good man," Vincent said. "Fair wages, decent food, and he does not work his men to death. I have been there 3 years now, saved most of my pay. I have dreams of starting my own small ranch someday. Nothing grand, just enough cattle to make a living and a piece of land to call my own." Ophelia found herself telling him things she rarely shared. Her frustrations with the limitations placed on women, her love of reading and learning, her secret dream of perhaps teaching school someday. "But father needs help with the homestead," she said. "And there are not many opportunities for women out here, even teaching positions. Most school boards prefer men." "That seems short-sighted," Vincent said. "The best teacher I ever had was a woman, Mrs. Fletcher back in Missouri. She made learning feel like adventure rather than chore." The easy way they talked surprised Ophelia. She had known this man for mere hours, yet she felt more comfortable with him than with men she had known for years. Perhaps the intensity of nearly dying had stripped away the usual social pretenses. Or perhaps Vincent Walker simply possessed the rare quality of being genuinely good. As night fell, Vincent gave Ophelia the bed and made himself a pallet on the floor near the door. She protested, but he insisted. "You nearly died today," he said firmly. "You need proper rest. I have slept in worse places than a warm floor, believe me." But sleep eluded Ophelia for a long time. She lay in the darkness, listening to the storm howl outside and the quiet sound of Vincent's breathing across the room. Her mind kept returning to that moment under the ice, the terror and certainty of death. And then his hand breaking through, reaching for her, refusing to let her go. She touched her wrist where he had grabbed her, where she could still feel the phantom pressure of his fingers. She had been so close to death. And now, lying here warm and safe, the world felt different, sharper, more precious. Every breath seemed like a gift. And the man who had given her those breaths lay a few feet away, having risked his own life without hesitation for a stranger. The storm blew itself out by morning. Ophelia woke to pale sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee brewing. Vincent was already up, dressed in his now dry clothes, preparing breakfast. "Good morning," he said, glancing over with a smile that made something flutter in Ophelia's chest. "How do you feel?" "Sore," she admitted. "But alive, thanks to you." Her own clothes had dried overnight, hanging near the stove. Vincent stepped outside to tend the horse while she dressed, and by the time he returned, she felt almost normal. They ate quickly, both anxious to reach her family's homestead and ease her parents' worry. The ride took over an hour through snow-covered landscape. Ophelia sat before Vincent on the horse again, but this time fully conscious of his closeness, the strength of his arms, the steady beat of his heart against her back. She found herself wishing the journey could last longer. Her mother flew out of the house when they approached, her face etched with worry and relief. "Ophelia, thank God, we have been frantic, when the storm came and you had not returned." Her father appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket, still pale from illness but standing upright. Vincent quickly explained what had happened, taking full responsibility for keeping Ophelia at the line shack overnight, and emphasizing that he had maintained complete propriety. "You saved my daughter's life," Ophelia's father, Thomas Carson, said, his voice rough with emotion. "We can never repay that debt." "No debt exists," Vincent said. "I only did what was right, but I should return to the ranch now. I am glad Miss Carson is safely home." He tipped his hat to them and began to turn his horse, but Ophelia stepped forward. "Wait," she said. "Will you come back?" "To visit, I mean. I would like to properly thank you, and Mother makes wonderful apple pie." Something warm flashed in Vincent's eyes. "I would like that very much, Miss Carson." He did come back. 3 days later, on Sunday afternoon, he arrived at the Carson homestead, wearing his best clothes and carrying a bouquet of winter sage and dried wildflowers he must have painstakingly gathered. Ophelia's mother, Margaret, fussed over him, serving pie and coffee while her father questioned him about his work and prospects. Vincent answered honestly, neither boasting nor diminishing himself, and Ophelia watched her father's approval grow. They walked together after the meal, Ophelia and Vincent, strolling around the property while the winter sun shone weakly overhead. "I have thought about you every day since the river," Vincent admitted. "I know that is forward of me to say, but nearly losing you before I even knew you made me realize that life is too short for hesitation." "I have thought of you too," Ophelia said quietly. "You were so brave, so kind. I keep wondering what might have happened if you had not been there, and then I am grateful beyond words that you were." "May I call on you properly?" Vincent asked, stopping to face her. "Court you, I mean." "I know I am just a ranch hand with little to offer right now, but I am hardworking and honest, and I promise I would do everything in my power to make you happy." Ophelia's heart soared. "Yes," she said, smiling up at him. "I would like that very much." The courtship that followed was unlike anything Ophelia had experienced before. Vincent came to visit every Sunday, and whenever he had free time during the week, he found excuses to ride past the Carson homestead. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. He brought her books borrowed from the ranch owner's library, knowing her love of reading. She baked him cakes and pies, learning what flavors he preferred. They walked together, rode together when he could borrow a horse for her, and slowly, steadily, fell deeper in love. Spring arrived, melting the snow and turning the prairie green. Vincent had saved nearly every penny of his wages for years, and he approached Ophelia's father with a proposal. Mr. Harrison was selling off a section of land bordering his ranch, and Vincent wanted to buy it and start his own place. But he needed help with the down payment. "I am asking permission to marry your daughter," Vincent said, standing in the Carson's small parlor with his hat in his hands. "And I am asking if you might consider lending me part of the funds for the land purchase. I will pay you back with interest, I swear it. But I want to have something solid to offer Ophelia, a real future, before we wed." Thomas Carson studied the young man before him. His illness had passed, and he had spent months watching Vincent court his daughter with patience and respect. "You love her," he said. "It was not a question." "More than my own life," Vincent said simply. "She is the finest woman I have ever known, smart, brave, kind. When I pulled her from that river, I did not know I was saving the woman I would want to spend my entire life with. But I know it now, and I will work every day to be worthy of her." "You already are," Thomas said. "And yes, you have my blessing, and yes, I will loan you the money. Consider it a wedding gift. You do not need to pay it back." Vincent tried to protest, but Thomas held up his hand. "You saved my daughter's life. That debt can never be repaid with money. But seeing her happy with a good man comes close. Take the loan, buy your land, and build a life with Ophelia. That is all the payment I need." When Vincent proposed that evening, kneeling in the Carsons' modest garden as the sun set, Ophelia cried and laughed and said yes before he even finished asking. The ring he slipped on her finger was simple, just a thin gold band, but to her it was more precious than all the jewels in the world. They married in late May of 1878 in a small ceremony at the church in Dodge City. The Triple Creek Ranch hands all attended, along with many of the local homesteaders and townspeople who had heard the story of the cowboy who broke through ice to save his future bride. Mr. Harrison gave Vincent a week away from work as a wedding gift, and Ophelia's mother cried happy tears as she watched her daughter marry the man who had given her back her life. The land Vincent purchased sat in a beautiful valley with a creek running through it and good grass for cattle. They lived in a tent at first, working from dawn to dusk to build a cabin. Ophelia proved as capable with hammer and saw as Vincent, and together they raised walls and laid roof beams. When the cabin was finished, small but sturdy with a good fireplace and real glass windows, they stood back and looked at what they had created. "It is perfect," Ophelia said, leaning against her husband's side. "It is just the beginning," Vincent said, kissing the top of her head. "We will build something wonderful here, Ophelia. A real ranch, a real home, for us and for the children we will have someday." They bought cattle with the last of Vincent's savings, just 10 head to start. Vincent worked harder than Ophelia had ever seen anyone work, and she matched him hour for hour. They branded their cattle with a simple mark they designed together, a W and C intertwined. The Walker Carson brand. Their brand. Their future. The first year tested them. A summer drought killed half their first crop of hay. 2 calves died from disease. The work was brutal and endless, but they faced it together, and somehow that made even the hardest days bearable. At night, exhausted, they would fall into bed in their little cabin and hold each other, sharing warmth and comfort and love. "Do you ever regret it?" Vincent asked one night as they lay together listening to coyotes howl in the distance. "Marrying a poor cowboy with nothing but dreams and debts." "Never," Ophelia said fiercely, rising up on her elbow to look at him in the moonlight streaming through their window. "You gave me my life, Vincent, and then you gave me a life worth living. How could I possibly regret that?" He pulled her down for a kiss that started gentle and grew heated. Making love with her husband never grew old for Ophelia. Each time felt like a gift, a celebration of their survival and their choice to build something beautiful together. By their second anniversary, things began to improve. Their herd had grown to 30 head. Vincent had developed a reputation for honest dealing and good stock. They had paid back a portion of what they owed Ophelia's parents, despite Thomas insisting it was not necessary. And Ophelia discovered she was pregnant. She told Vincent on a warm June evening as they sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. He stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, and then he whooped with joy and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around while she laughed and told him to be careful of the baby. "A baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby. Ophelia, you have made me the happiest man alive." Their son was born in February of 1881, 3 years almost to the day after Ophelia had fallen through the ice. They named him Thomas Vincent Walker, after both his grandfathers, and he came into the world red-faced and howling with healthy lungs. Vincent held his son with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face as he looked from the baby to Ophelia. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for surviving. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for this perfect little boy." Motherhood suited Ophelia. She loved little Thomas with a fierce intensity that sometimes frightened her. Every time she looked at him, she thought about how close she had come to never experiencing this, never knowing this love. The ice had almost taken all of this away, but Vincent had not let it. Vincent had broken through and pulled her into a future more beautiful than any she could have imagined. The ranch continued to grow. They hired a hand to help with the increased workload, then 2 hands. Within 5 years, they were running over 200 head of cattle and had built a proper ranch house with multiple rooms and a real parlor. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Margaret after Ophelia's mother, and another son they called James. Vincent proved to be a wonderful father, patient and playful with the children, teaching them to ride and rope and care for animals. But he also supported Ophelia's insistence that they learn reading and arithmetic. She taught them herself, using the books Vincent still brought her whenever he went to town, and she dreamed of the day when Dodge City might have a proper school. On a February evening in 1888, 10 years after the day they met, Vincent and Ophelia stood together on the porch of their ranch house watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was 7 now, chasing 6-year-old Margaret while 4-year-old James toddled after them both. "Do you remember this day?" Vincent asked, slipping his arm around Ophelia's waist. "Every detail," she said, leaning into him. "The cold, the terror, your hand reaching through the ice. I remember thinking I was dead, and then suddenly I was not because you refused to let me go." "I have never regretted breaking through that ice," Vincent said. "Even though I could have died, even though it was reckless and foolish, because it brought me you." "We were both foolish that day," Ophelia said with a smile. "Me for crossing the river, you for diving in after me. But sometimes foolishness leads to the best things in life." Their children's laughter rang out across the prairie as the sun set behind distant hills. The ranch that had started as a dream now stood solid and real around them. The herd that had begun with 10 head now numbered in the hundreds. The love that had sparked in a moment of crisis had grown into something deep and enduring and true. "I love you," Vincent said, "not for the first time and not for the last. I will love you until the day I die and beyond, if such things are possible." "They are possible," Ophelia said, reaching up to touch his face. "Because my love for you will last just as long. You are my hero, Vincent Walker. You always will be." He kissed her then, sweet and slow, while their children played and the evening stars began to emerge overhead. The prairie wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the promise of seasons to come, of years yet to be lived, of a future they had built together from nothing but courage and hope and love. Years continued to pass, each one adding new memories and new joys. The children grew tall and strong. Thomas showed a natural talent for working cattle and often rode out with his father to check the herd. Margaret inherited her mother's love of learning and could often be found reading books in the shade of the cottonwood trees Vincent had planted near the house. James proved to be the adventurous one, always exploring, always asking questions about how things worked and why. Vincent and Ophelia's parents visited often, growing older but remaining active and involved in their grandchildren's lives. Thomas Carson took great pride in what his daughter and son-in-law had built. "You proved me right," he told Vincent during one visit. "I knew you were a good man the moment you brought my daughter home." The ranch became known throughout the region for quality cattle and honest dealing. Vincent never forgot the poverty of his youth or the kindness of those who had helped him. He hired drifters down on their luck, giving them work and fair wages. He extended credit to neighbors facing hard times. He and Ophelia became pillars of the growing community, known for their generosity and their strong marriage, but the memory of the river never truly left them. Every February 14th, they made a pilgrimage to the spot where Ophelia had fallen through the ice. They stood together on the bank, holding hands, remembering the day that had changed everything. Sometimes they brought the children, telling them the story of how their parents had met, how love could be born from the moment when death seemed certain. "What would you have done if Papa had not been there?" Margaret asked once when she was 10 years old, standing on the riverbank with her parents and brothers. Ophelia looked at Vincent, then back at her daughter. "I would have died," she said honestly. "There is no question about that. But your Papa was there, and he saved me, and because of his courage, we have all of this. Our family, our home, our life together. Never forget that sometimes bravery is the difference between tragedy and joy." In 1895, when Thomas was 14, Margaret 12, and James 10, Dodge City finally established a proper school. The town council offered Ophelia the teaching position, knowing her education and her skill with her own children. She accepted with Vincent's full support, thrilled to finally pursue the dream she had held for so long. She proved to be an excellent teacher, patient and creative, making learning exciting for her students. Vincent attended the end-of-year exhibitions proudly, watching his wife shine as she presented her students' accomplishments. Seeing her so fulfilled and happy added another dimension to their already strong marriage. Their own children eventually grew and began making their own ways in the world. Thomas stayed on the ranch, taking over more and more of the daily operations as Vincent's hair began to gray. Margaret went east to a teaching college, determined to return and teach alongside her mother. James apprenticed with a veterinarian in Dodge City, combining his love of animals with his curious mind. Through it all, Vincent and Ophelia remained devoted to each other. They still walked together in the evenings, still talked for hours about everything and nothing, still looked at each other with the same love that had bloomed in a lined shack during a winter storm. Their romance never faded into mere companionship. It deepened, matured, became something richer and more complex with each passing year. On their 20th anniversary in 1898, Vincent surprised Ophelia with a gift. He had commissioned a painting from an artist passing through Dodge City, working from Vincent's descriptions. It showed the Arkansas River in winter, ice and snow, and a man's hand breaking through the frozen surface, reaching down toward a woman's hand reaching up. It was beautiful and haunting and perfect. "So we never forget," Vincent said as Ophelia cried happy tears. "So we always remember that every day we have together is a gift we almost did not receive." They hung the painting in the parlor where everyone who visited could see it. It became a conversation piece, a way to share their story with friends and strangers alike. And always, when Ophelia looked at it, she felt a rush of gratitude so intense it took her breath away. Life was not without its sorrows. Ophelia's father passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1900, and her mother followed him just 2 years later. Vincent held Ophelia through her grief, as she had held him when Mr. Harrison died and when old friends passed on. They learned that love meant being each other's comfort in sadness as well as their joy and happiness. But the joys far outweighed the sorrows. Thomas married a lovely woman named Sarah from a neighboring ranch, and they gave Vincent and Ophelia their first grandchildren, twin boys who looked exactly like their grandfather. Margaret returned from college and took a teaching position in the growing town, eventually marrying the veterinarian James had apprenticed with. James himself went to veterinary school and returned to establish a thriving practice serving all the ranches in the region. Vincent and Ophelia grew older gracefully, their faces weathering like the Kansas prairie they loved, their bodies slowing but their minds sharp, and their love undimmed. They handed over most of the ranch operations to Thomas, but remained active, offering advice and help when needed, spoiling their grandchildren, and continuing to walk together each evening as the sun set. On February 14th, 1908, 30 years to the day after Vincent had pulled Ophelia from the icy river, they made their annual pilgrimage to the spot. They were both 52 years old now, their hair gray, their hands roughened by decades of hard work. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young woman who had fought for her life beneath the ice and the young man who had refused to let her die. 30 years, Ophelia said, holding Vincent's hand as they stood on the riverbank. The ice was solid today, no cracks or weaknesses visible. 30 years of marriage, 3 children, 6 grandchildren, and a life I could never have imagined when I was drowning under this ice. "Do you think you would change anything?" Vincent asked. "If you could go back, would you take the bridge instead of crossing the ice?" Ophelia laughed. "What kind of question is that? Of course not. Because then I would never have met you. I would never have known this love. Yes, I was terrified. Yes, I nearly died. But that moment led to everything good in my life. I would not change a single thing." Vincent pulled her close, kissing her with the same passion he had shown as a young man. "I love you, Ophelia Walker. I have loved you from the moment I saw you fighting to survive beneath that ice. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you," she said, resting her head against his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. "My hero, my husband, my home." They stood together as the winter sun shone down on them. 2 people who had been given the gift of time when time should have run out, who had taken that gift and built something beautiful and lasting. The river flowed beneath its coating of ice, eternal and unchanging, a silent witness to the love story that had begun with terror and ended with joy. As they walked back to their wagon, hand in hand, Ophelia thought about all the young couples just starting out, facing uncertain futures and difficult challenges. She wished she could tell them all that love was worth fighting for, that courage could change everything, that the moments when we choose to reach for each other rather than pull away are the moments that define our lives. But she knew that each couple had to learn these lessons themselves, just as she and Vincent had learned them. Love could not be taught. It could only be lived day by day, choice by choice, moment by moment. Their grandchildren were waiting at the ranch house when they returned, along with Thomas and Sarah and Margaret and her husband David and James, and his new bride Emma. The family had gathered to celebrate the anniversary, and the house rang with laughter and conversation and the sounds of children playing. Vincent stood in the doorway of the parlor, watching his family, and felt peace settle over him like a warm blanket. This was what he had worked for. This was what breaking through that ice had been about. Not just saving one life, but creating many lives, a whole future full of love and laughter and connection. Ophelia came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. "That I am the luckiest man who ever lived," he said. "That 30 years ago I made the best decision of my life when I jumped into that river after you. That every hard day, every struggle, every challenge was worth it to have this moment right now." She squeezed his hand. "We were both lucky. Lucky that you were there. Lucky that you were brave. Lucky that we found each other. But we also worked hard for this, Vincent. We built this together. That is not just luck. That is love and commitment and choosing each other every single day." He turned to her, cupping her face in his weathered hands. "And I will keep choosing you every day I have left. You are my greatest adventure, Ophelia, my greatest love, my everything." Their oldest grandson, 7-year-old Vincent Thomas Walker, came running up to them. "Grandma, Grandpa, Mama says it is time for cake." They laughed and let him pull them into the dining room where a magnificent cake sat on the table, decorated with flowers made of frosting. Margaret had baked it herself, using her mother's recipes, continuing the tradition of love through food that Ophelia had started so many years ago. As they cut the cake together, Vincent's hand over Ophelia's on the knife, she looked around at the faces of their children and grandchildren and felt overwhelming gratitude. This was the life she had almost lost. This was the future that had waited on the other side of terror and cold and certain death. This was what happened when a cowboy broke through ice to save a drowning woman and discovered he was really saving himself, finding the missing piece of his soul he had not even known was absent. The evening passed in warmth and joy. Stories were told and retold, the famous tale of how Grandma and Grandpa met repeated for the youngest grandchildren who never tired of hearing it. Presents were exchanged, simple and thoughtful. Songs were sung around the piano that Vincent had bought for Ophelia 15 years ago, when they finally had enough money for such luxuries. When everyone finally left and the house grew quiet, Vincent and Ophelia prepared for bed in their comfortable room with its wide bed, and the quilt Ophelia's mother had made them for their wedding. They moved around each other with the easy familiarity of 3 decades together, each knowing where the other would be, what the other needed without needing words. In bed, Ophelia curled against Vincent's side, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her. This was her favorite place in all the world. Here in the darkness, in the warmth of her husband's embrace, she felt completely safe, completely loved, completely home. "Vincent," she said softly. "Yes, my love, thank you for not giving up on me that day. For breaking through the ice even though it was dangerous, for refusing to let me die." He tightened his arm around her. "There was never a choice, Ophelia. My body moved before my mind could think. I saw you fall and I knew I had to reach you. Nothing else mattered." "Still," she said, "thank you for that day and for every day since. You have given me the most beautiful life." "We gave each other beautiful lives," he corrected gently. "You saved me just as much as I saved you. I was drifting before I met you, just working and existing but not really living. You gave me purpose. You gave me a reason to build something lasting. You made me into the man I always wanted to be." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, 2 souls bound together by fate and choice and love so deep it had weathered 3 decades and would weather whatever time they had left. The years that followed were gentler. Vincent and Ophelia fully retired from active ranch work, leaving the operations entirely to Thomas and his growing family. They traveled a bit, taking the train to Denver and even once to St. Louis, marveling at how the world had changed since they were young. But they always came home to their ranch, to the Kansas prairie, to the place they had built together. They grew old together, watching their grandchildren grow and begin having children of their own. Great-grandchildren arrived, and Vincent and Ophelia held these tiny new lives with wonder, amazed that their love had created such an extensive family tree. On a spring morning in 1920, 42 years after they met, Vincent did not wake up. He passed peacefully in his sleep, his hand still holding Ophelia's. He was 73 years old and had lived a full, rich life surrounded by love. Ophelia grieved deeply, but she did not break. She had learned strength from a lifetime with a strong man. She lived 4 more years, spending that time with her family, teaching her great-grandchildren to read, telling stories about the grandfather they would barely remember or never knew. On February 14, 1924, Ophelia asked her son Thomas to take her to the river. It was a warm winter day, unseasonably mild, and the river ran free of ice. She stood on the bank where Vincent had pulled her from the water 46 years earlier and felt his presence beside her as clearly as if he still lived. "I am coming soon, my love," she whispered to the wind. "Wait for me just a little longer. I want to tell the little ones a few more stories. I want to see Margaret's newest grandchild when it is born in spring. But then I will come to you, and we will never be apart again." She passed peacefully in her sleep 2 months later, surrounded by 3 generations of family, dying in the same bed where she had slept beside Vincent for over 40 years. Her last words were, "I see him. He is reaching for me." And then she was gone. They buried her next to Vincent on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. Under the wide Kansas sky they had both loved. The whole community turned out for the funeral. Generations of people whose lives had been touched by the love story of the cowboy who broke through ice to save a drowning woman and found his forever. The ranch continued, passed down through the generations. The story of Vincent and Ophelia Walker becoming family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The painting of the hand breaking through ice hung in the ranch house for over a century. A reminder that love is worth fighting for, that courage can change everything, and that sometimes the moments when we risk everything are the moments that give us everything worth having. And if you visit that ranch even now, walk to the hill where 2 headstones stand side by side, you can read the inscription Vincent had carved for them years before they died. It says simply, "He saved her. She saved him. Together they built a love that death cannot end."